God bless you, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. I'm very blessed to have as my special guest Samuel Baker joining me all the way from England. And he is a husband, father, teacher, and he has a passion for authentic Catholic masculinity. He's also has a website, Catholic Man UK. I'll list that on the screen. And then also you have a show on EWTN that I noticed, EWTN the UK, which is really good. I watched some of that. Thank you, Samuel, for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, and it's an absolute pleasure to be talking with you. I've followed your blog for some time and read a lot of your stuff, and you're certainly in this niche of Catholic men in the UK a hero. So thank you.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. Um, what drew me a lot to your work is it's prolific. You've written quite a bit, and there's a number of videos on YouTube that you've done. So there's a lot of material here. A lot of it resonated with me. Um, there's a talk you gave last year, August 20th, 2019, and I'll post a link here too so people can watch it. It was a speech you gave to the Catholic Medical Association of England and Wales, and what it's very quotable, and I like people who write in a quotable way and who speak in very quotable, because I just had a whole page here of things that struck me about what you said. I could have done more. This was one of the things you said at the very beginning, and you said, when authentic manhood is absent from society, society perishes. Could you explain that a little more? I know exactly what you meant, but maybe some people it'll be a bit difficult to unpack.
Yeah, I think we're dealing with a slightly contentious point that men are the both the drivers and the protectors of good, stable society. And in this day and age, I think a number of women take us to task on this and say, well, where does that leave us? Are you saying that men should be the dominant force in society today? And this is a difficult topic to deal with because very few people choose to go to the very root of the issue and say that manhood, masculinity, has been ordained by God the Father to be his means of representing himself on earth. And if we deny the place of the father, the place of the man, we're talking about biological fatherhood as much as spiritual fatherhood. We're talking about priesthood and we're talking about lay fatherhood. If you take that out of the equation, then the established hierarchy that has been put in place by God the Father simply falls apart. But few of us see that as the as the immediate consequence. I think we've lost touch with God the Father. We've lost touch with our faith. We've lost touch with religion. And what goes is what we want to go. And if that is that men and women take an equal driving place in society, then that's what goes. And men just hold up their hands and go, fine, okay, well, we can deal with that. I think men need to reconnect with this sense of responsibility, this divinely ordained responsibility that they are there to lead their families, their spiritual and biological families, to procreate to start with, to create those families one way or another, then to lead them, then to provide for them, and to protect them spiritually as well as physically. And we need to reclaim that, but we need to reclaim it in a way that is very sacrificial, to move away from these accusations that we might be misogynistic, that we might be denying women their own human rights in this. It's a very, very difficult balance to strike in this day and age, I think.
Right. You, at the very beginning of your website, I love it. There's a lot there.
Mm.
And you titled one page a Geri Sequitur essay, sorry for my Latin, Action follows being. And I was reading it, and it's very simple, but I don't mean simple in a like a basic way. This because you're taught. I'll let you explain what you mean, but I think this will be profound for a lot of men. It's kind of like in terms of how Jordan Peterson gave very basic sort of advice about standing up straight and cleaning your room. And
Mm.
this was a very good summary of why why men should act a certain way and should do certain things because action follows being. Well, I'll let you explain it. And
Mm.
it's a great article. I recommend everybody to read it.
I'm actually surprised you found it because I put it in there as a little kind of Easter egg. You have to click
Really,
on something to find it first. It's not,
I can't
yeah,
remember
you must have
because
clicked on,
I don't know. It was awesome.
yeah, yeah. So I'd sort of hidden it there because we'd chosen this motto for Catholic Man UK, Agere Executor Esse Action Follows Being, after quite a bit of discussion. And I didn't really understand it for myself at the time, but it was recommended by the priest, Father Pius Collins, who's um, our spiritual director. I thought, okay, right, good. And then I'll look into this. So um, I started off from a place of ignorance as well about this whole thing. But it opened up for me. It's rather like Alice in Wonderland, Alice going down the rabbit hole. It opens up unknown vistas for you and places to explore. So I thought, well, what I'll do, I'll embed it in the website as an Easter egg. And if someone clicks on the right link, they'll find it. And you clearly did. So well done. Anyway.
That's the Holy Spirit working.
Yeah, clearly. Absolutely. Action follows being. Well, this is from Thomas Aquinas, and it's his theory that anything that has been created for a purpose, and if it works against its purpose, it's a denial of its essence, in effect. And I think in that piece that I wrote, I take a cup. We make a cup out of clay. That cup has a task to do, which is to hold liquid for us to drink. If the handle falls off the cup, it makes it a little bit more difficult to drink, and therefore the essence of that cup, the being, the action, sorry, that it's supposed to carry out by being a cup is slightly it's detrimental to us as the drinker. If the bottom falls out of that cup, then that cup is no longer fit for purpose, and we get rid of it. And there's a slight moral outrage. This cup no longer does what it should be doing. Let's throw the thing out. I could hit you over the head with the cup and use it as a weapon. I could use it to hold pens. And even there's a slight aberration in what it's supposed to do. That's not what the cup is for. If you scale that up then to us as men, it's very clear, and this is where the whole gender debate is well in denial. We look at ourselves in the mirror and we see our genitalia and we understand our drive for sex. Those are two clear things that tell us what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be creating children in our capacity as a man, and that man we call father. So it right at the center, right at our core, not only our physical core, our genitals, but our core desire drives us to what we should be doing, to the action we should be taking. So our whole being is ordained, ordered towards that action of fatherhood, which is why it's so remarkable that people deny it in this day and age, that that's not what we're meant to be doing. Just a brief sort of end on that before we move on. I think if some people come back and say, well, what about those men who can't father for whatever reason? What about those men who are single? What about priests? These are just physical symbols, in a way, of the task of fatherhood that every man is called to. They're just the outward signs that we are meant to represent God the Father, God's paternity in physical ways to the people that who are entrusted to our care, or who are closest to us, or who we're responsible for. And that could be as counselors, mentors, teachers, whatever it might be. Not necessarily biological fatherhood, of course, but it's very symbolic of who we are and what we are meant to be doing.
Yeah. what there's another aspect of that essay that struck me, and I think what makes it great is because it can speak to different people in different ways. And me coming from more of a viewpoint or a perspective of somebody that experienced same-sex attraction, that what made me think it's profound is when you're talking about form and function, because you don't talk about homosexuality there, but I extrapolated that to
Yeah, yeah.
it definitely speaks to that issue as well.
Mm, mm.
This is something else you said in that August 20, 2019 speech that you gave. You wrote, males gravitate towards extremes, and when we allow those extremes to become our expectations or behavior, we turn away from our real purpose. Again, this is something that I thought of more in a viewpoint of people that experience homosexuality. Certainly in the male only environment of the gay male community, it definitely swerves towards extremes. And
Don't we see
you're
this in a lot of
you're oh, go ahead.
environments? Gangs, for example. Um, I think there are many areas where if the masculine environment isn't one of
Unchecked.
virtue or checked, yes, exactly, then those extremes take place. And I think one of the things that we want to try and do within Catholic masculinity is to reset the boundaries through the virtues, through the virtuous life. But go ahead.
Yeah,
You were going to
because
say,
there's a form of extremes that exists in men that don't exist in women, and you would know this better than I, as a married man. And I don't think people get that because, like you said, I think masculinity unchecked, I'll say by the feminine, is it can swerve towards fascism, homosexuality, all of these things, violence, all of these things.
mm, mm. It's interesting that you say masculinity unchecked by women, um, because I would agree with you, and I think, isn't it Fulton Sheen that talks about the level of civilization being at the level of its women? Um, and if our women raise the stakes, raise the game, we too as men have to be made worthy of our women. And certainly, if our women hold us to account, then we step up. Um, but I think again, there's a fine balance because I grew up in a matriarchal cult. It was a Catholic community that had some very, very cultish aspects to it. And the priest that started it um, elevated the women and pushed the men away. It was his kind of way as an alpha male of dominating the situation. And once he died, it was the women that took over. And that's what caused me some real problems as a young man, that I was in a very female dominated environment. So I think there has to be a balance, and how do we strike that balance in this day and age? That's a very difficult question.
There's a lot about, and you're very, that's one of the things I liked about you too, is you're very open, honest about your own story, which I haven't seen many straight men do that at all. Because there's a lot of incidences in your story that correlate with the life stories of men who later came out as gay. Not a great relationship with your dad, overly influenced from women, alienation from peers, not sporty. I mean, I could go on and on and on and on.
It's interesting you say that, because certainly reading some of your stuff, I've then asked myself, well, why didn't that happen? Why didn't I?
Homosexuality is very rare in men.
Yeah,
At most 4%.
right. Yeah. So even given those conditions, I mean, you say it correlates across to a lot of stories of gay men. And in fact, in this sort of apostolate of Catholic Man UK, there are a number of men who have spoken to me privately, and their stories correlate to mine, yet they've gone a different route.
But
So
I don't want to speak for you, but you got into to and you talked about it, pornography, masturbation. You had some other
yeah,
issues, and
yeah.
were you a boozer as well? So
Sorry, ask again.
were you were you a drink? You didn't talk about drinking or any other forms of addictions, no, but
No, interestingly, I don't have what's perhaps seen as as an addictive personality. Although I did get into pornography, I think that was as much to it was a kind of escapism from my upbringing, um, and I turned to it for comfort. As I think I said in my talk, I sucked my thumb until I
that's
was old enough to be able to masturbate.
that was
Um,
awfully brave of you to admit that. Wow.
yeah, perhaps yes. I don't know if many men would, but it did seem to me to be one step followed another. That when I was a boy, I would sneak into a corner, into the most comfortable chair, and read a book and plug my thumb in, and then that pushed the rest of the world away. Yeah, this horrible community thing that was going on around me. Um, I think then that moved to fantasy,
Yep.
particularly when you're reading and you're thinking and you're on your own. And as I grew older, the fantasies developed to be erotic fantasy, um, largely around women who are older than me, who were perhaps better mothers. I don't know, than my own mother. And then that bit by bit, obviously, clearly went into pornography, and the type of pornography I looked at tended to be dealing with older women who were involved.
It
Um,
happens a lot. I mean, I don't want to get too deep in the woods, but like a form of
no,
like I know a form of like what do they call it? MILF porn
oh, exactly. Yeah.
is very popular, which from my point of view, I don't quite understand. But we have
Mm.
something in gay male pornography, which is the same, which is the DILF porn, which is
Mm-hmm.
dads.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I mean, this speaks. I don't watch porn anymore, but
Right.
sometimes
Likewise.
I do read articles from like Pornhub, and one of the things they do that's quite honest about, I guess, their business is they do reveal, trends in what
Yes.
people are searching for, and
Mm.
MILF and DILF are always at the top, and I'm like, whoa, this
Yeah.
speaks a lot about something sick going on in men right now.
Yeah.
So
Yes. Yeah. And I think one part of my journey away from all of this was Jungian psychology. I read the book King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. I probably got the four words in the wrong way around. Um, but this need to move away from being a juvenile to being an adult, and to and it took specific concrete steps to do so. One of which was to be initiated into the adult masculine by good, decent men who were
exactly.
elders in the community. And you can see that, perhaps, I mean, you can tell me this better, but I've read your stuff, that something like that goes on within gay lifestyle. It's always the older men who seem to sort of bring the younger men in.
Very much
Um,
so.
and that that doesn't happen very much in the straight men lifestyle. There are very few places in this day and age where you can have that rite of passage without it taking on some level of homoeroticism to
Yeah.
start with, or just being a little bit weird and dated.
Or unless you get involved with these subcultures like gangs, or
Yes.
or a lot of this gaming subculture too, I think has aspects of that, which again I'm not familiar with, but what I
Oh, I went
read.
through it in my adolescent life, gaming, Dungeons and Dragons, all that sort of stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now you talk a lot about in that speech you gave, you said there's no manual and no guide on how to what you were talking about, how to sort of be initiated into
Mm.
the world of men. And you were used a word, but I want to read the whole quote. You wrote, "There's something elusive about being a real man that I couldn't put my finger on. It never occurred to me that the lack of strong, involved fatherhood was the root cause. Um, the word that caught my eye, I mean, the whole thing did. You used the word elusive. There's a there's a gay historian that I really like, Michael Bronsky, and he used that word elusive too,
Mm,
where masculinity was perceived as elusive by a lot of pre-homosexual boys.
mm.
And then Camille Paglia, I don't know if you're familiar with her. She's an American, I don't know what you call her, American. She's an academic, but I guess author, commentator. And she wrote, "A woman simply is, but a man must become. Masculinity is risky and elusive, and is confirmed only by other men."
Oh, absolutely. And I think I've heard that quote, or at least the first part of it before, that women are and men become. I'm sure I've even used it. So maybe I have heard of her. I just
Yeah,
didn't know.
she's a quite famous lesbian author here in the United States. But so I mean, you
Rings a
use
bell. Yeah.
that, yeah, you use that term as well, and I think it is elusive. And I think, like you said, there is no manual. Well, you had no manual and no guide,
Mm,
and
mm,
neither did I.
yeah.
I mean, and this can get into a conversation that I guess I could get deeper into it, but I've argued, and you have a really good quote that I'm gonna read later on, that men are absent a lot. I mean, we have to figure half of families, the dad is probably physically not there full time because they're divorced, or they share uh,
Mm,
custody, which is a lot of problems.
mm.
But then dad, just because of economics, if there is an intact family, dad's just not there a lot, and all of the problems that
Mm.
causes, right?
Yeah. And even if dad is physically present, you often have to ask yourself, is dad actually
Yeah,
literally intervening in the life of his kids?
probably not.
No, no. And I've realized being a father, particularly as my boys now 13 and well, coming up 13 and 15, and they're hitting, well, they have hit puberty, and they're all the associated things that come with it, but not just that, but also talking about their future and what they are going to become professionally, as much as anything else. And the level of deliberate intervention that is required was unexpected. Um, Unexpected because my own father didn't tell me, and no other man has told me that you have to step in physically, literally physically, take your boys by the scruff of the neck and deal with them. And one of my boys, I found out that he was very naively, but starting down the line of messaging a girl a year younger than him, and starting to ask her for pictures. And when I found this out,
Oh dear.
I ripped the shit out of him, and said, this just is not how we behave. If you see other people behaving like this is wrong. It's wrong, wrong, wrong. And you're grounded and your phone's taken off of you. And this doesn't happen again. As men, we don't do this. And I found in myself that I had to screw up the courage to step in and say this to him and deal with the grumpy teenage consequences that might have ensued. And go, come on, Samuel, you're a man, you're his father, for God's sake. If he gets grumpy and starts shouting at you, well, shout back at him. You're his dad. And that surprised me. It took me pleasantly by surprise, in effect, once I sort of computed what that actually meant. That here's this boy growing up, physically growing up, he's getting strong, but he's doing something he shouldn't be doing. You've got to step in and
Yeah,
squash it immediately, there and then. Doesn't happen. And fair play to him. He took it. He's dealt with it. He's got his phone back. And I'll check again, but God willing, he's behaving himself.
well, I mean, you've set the tone for your home, and I'm not downing anything that my parents did, but I grew up in the 70s and the 80s, and my brother had half naked posters of Farrah
Mm,
Fawcett, Cheryl Tiegs,
mm,
Playboy,
mm,
always had TV specials on. with the village people. It's the culture was so sexualized. It's difficult. I can't imagine as a parent now, but it was probably very difficult then for my mom and dad. And then movies, you had movies like Porky's and all that stuff. So
Mm.
I guess it was a matter of Pandora's box back then.
Yeah.
Once that lid was open, how do you close it again without appearing like a total like tyrant and like totally uncool? But
I think you have to do that and accept that you're going to look like a tyrant and uncool. Although I have moderated my own behavior as a father rather than, I mean, I was disappointed with my son. I told him I was disappointed, but before, let's say maybe even 4 or 5 years ago, I would I would get into a rage, a furious rage, thinking that my rage would frighten them out of doing whatever wrong that they were doing. Um, but no, that doesn't work, and it does frighten them, and that's all it does. It doesn't change the behaviour. It just buries the behaviour underground. Um, and I think what I've said to my children recently, and I've particularly tried to hammer this home, is that I don't mind, in a way, what they do so long as they are honest to me and admit what they've done so they don't hide the situation. I want them to be open, because I think what's going to happen later on down the line is that they will hit a particular situation that really upsets them, will want to talk to someone, but if their father is too frightening to talk to, they won't talk to me and I won't be able to help them. So to encourage them to be open, to be frank, to be honest. And I can see it is changing my kids' habits. So my second son the other day, I just went upstairs and said, and it was all quiet. I said, "What are you doing?" I said, "You on your phone?" He's like, "No, I was reading." And I said, "Are you on your phone?" And he's like, "Yeah, I was on my phone. I'm really sorry." And for me, it's like, good lad, well done. That's what I want to hear. That is so much better than fighting against your children. And I think this is what I mean by the level of deliberate intervention. You as a father, and even as a priest, a parish priest, has to do the same level of intervention with his own parishioners. You have to really be engaging with the art and craft of fatherhood, to work out slowly but surely the golden way forwards with your own kids. And that's fun, but it's bloody hard work.
I want to read something that this is from the Catholic Man UK website, and when I read it, I was just like, yes. So
Good.
I don't think I'd really read it at all. So you wrote, home more than anywhere else is the natural environment of the man. And then
Yeah.
I'll skip a little part. Then you wrote, it is now his duty to see that in every respect, his home is in order. I mean, this is like so countercultural, because nowadays, I don't know how it is in England, but I mean, in the United States, we have this idea of like the soccer mom or the super mom who pretty much, and I'm not downing these women that do that, because I think they've stepped into that role
Mm.
because there was a vacuum, because just men weren't doing it. So, in a sense, almost men also were like an additional child that had to be managed and looked after and kept clean and everything, where the domestic environment was very much the realm of women. Men worked outside the home. I mean, this really got going after, this is my history background pop in, but this really got going after the Industrial Revolution, where, people before that tended to work at home, either on
Yeah.
farms or something, a blacksmith or baker. So,
Exactly. Yeah. Some kind
yeah,
of cottage industry. Yeah.
yeah, or people lived above, where they worked or something.
Mm.
So the family was much more, but then men were taken outside the home, first, but now women have too. And then in the United States, we have this, especially here in California, we have this ritual of the very long commute, where people are commuting 3, 4 hours a day, just beyond the work. So men understandably come home, collapse, watch some football, go to bed, and let the women take care of it. I was thinking about this quote too, and I love Charles Dickens, his short book, A Christmas Carol, because I love Bob Cratchit, because I think in many ways he's an example of a very good father. They're poor, doing the best they can, living in a post-industrial London, working like a dog, but he is involved with his family. And then you have the opposite, which I think is more a modern conception of masculinity, which is Ebenezer Scrooge, single, self-centered. And you talk about this. I had a quote from you. What was it? Where you said masculinity, is defined often by careers and incomes. And there's a TV show that I want you to talk. There's a TV show in the United States that I really like too. It's from the 70s. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it over there. It's called Good Times, and it was a African American family living in Chicago in the 70s, and the dad, who I love his character. Again, he's a lot like Bob Cratchit, working crazy, but very involved in his family. Like, he knew what they were doing, and they didn't have all the technology, but he was very keyed into everything. Just didn't leave it for the mother, who was very capable, but he was very involved. So I talked to him.
Oh, it's good to hear you. I wish I could also interview you and ask you some questions as well, because you've got a lot of interesting things and stories to tell. But no, let's go back to this mass exodus of the family from the home. I mean, it's incredible that in this day and age, most people's homes lie empty for most part of the day, as they have all exited the home to go and work for some kind of corporation. And the longer that we work, the more hours we work for these corporations, the more our children are not in the home, because they're being looked after by the state if they're staying after school in after school clubs, or other people's families if they're with childminders. And so our homes remain empty while our corporations remain full. And lockdown and the response to COVID, where people ended up coming back to their homes, and homes on a daily basis were full. I don't know about how things were perceived in the States, but over here, there's been quite an overwhelmingly positive response to people being at home. The dads I've spoken to have loved being at home with their children. This brings us back, as I mentioned earlier, to the 4 key tasks that Adam was given in the Garden of Eden: to procreate, to bring God's family alive; primacy, so leadership, to lead the family; and to protect and provide. And the church talks, and has talked recently, of the home being the domestic church. And I think it's St. Augustine who references men as leaders in their families as fellow bishops, fellow episcopi. He talks to them. I might have even brought this into the presentation that I gave to the Catholic Medical Association, that our role as fathers is not just on the same level as a priestly or bishop's role, but the priesthood comes from the family, the father, the role of the father. We have priestly roles to lead and guide our children and our families in the faith, and to bring them to the knowledge of God the Father. That can only be done in the home, under our jurisdiction. The home is its own government, it's its own economy. I don't know in the States if you had it, but we used to have a subject at school called home economics.
Oh yeah. For girls, it was mainly,
for girls mainly, yes, and it should have been for boys as well. And that's where we, as men, have jurisdiction. That's the power and authority that we've been given, is within the walls of our home, and that's what we have to protect. There's no point in going out and protecting some corporation, some faceless corporation from, I don't know, from fraud or libel or whatever it might be, if you're not protecting your own home. That's the God-given task, and that must come first and foremost. Again, it's a balance, because part of the provision of our family is earning an income. And in this day and age, more often than not, we've got to earn that by working for one of these faceless corporations. But there
Exactly.
is a move back, and I see it with some of the a lot of guys I know have a side hustle because they want to do their own, they want to run their own business,
Exactly.
and have that autonomy. I think it's deep within our psyche to want to do that, isn't
It's
it?
awesome. Yeah, I wasn't going to get into this, but I mean, you brought up like home ec. Is it, I mean, in the United States, there, and it's becoming less available. There was a shop primarily for boys called Shop. I mean, a class, it was called Shop. And it was, usually dealt, usually with like auto mechanics,
Mm-hmm.
something like that, sometimes carpentry. But I mean, I think it was so important because there were so many young men who aren't drawn to, let's say, an academic career and don't want to go to college and study, psych or gender
Media.
study, or
Yeah,
whatever, or
yeah,
whatever.
yeah. I
But
agree.
but yeah, it's unfortunate because I think it's important, and I think those young men I think are falling by the wayside because number one, they
Um,
don't have that mentor in school of a guy who works is more of a manual laborer. Here we call blue collar, where where you have to be funneled into academia, and I don't
it's
know what
certainly
the
how things have gone in England. Definitely.
That's too
When
bad.
I was at school, there was the automatic step through the school, leaving exams straight into university, and we were all being pushed in that direction, saddled with a bit of debt as well. Um, as a teacher, and I've been in teaching for 17 years now, I can see exactly the failings of the education system, particularly for boys. Year in, year out, the exam grades for the boys are markedly lower than the exam grades for the girls. And everyone does a bit of hand wringing and goes, oh, what's happening? Why are boys' grades consistently lower than girls' grades? And I want to say, oh, man, shoot me in the head. Yeah, it's easy to say because we are trying to get boys to learn in the way that girls learn, which is sitting still at a desk and writing out neatly and underlining it in a different color. And I'm just like, oh, I'm leaving teaching this year. I'm getting out of teaching. I'm going to the charity sector to do the Catholic charity sector, in fact, to do something else because I just can't handle it anymore. My own kids are in state school education, and I've been fortunate they've gone to the school that I have taught at, and I've kept a good eye on them, and on the content of the curriculum, and I've been able to sit at home with them and talk it through and supplement what they learn. Having said that, I've watched some very good initiatives in the United States for Catholic schools for boys. I can't remember off the top of my head. So I know Scott Hahn's kids have gone to one, haven't they? Which is, they've played rugby and they've had house systems and I think they've based it almost on an English boarding school type
Hmm.
education. But they've been they do outdoor things. They go out into the woods, into the rivers, lakes, and do canoeing, kayaking, um, and that's been excellent. Then there's something of a hybrid education model, also from the States, called the Regina Caeli Academy, which we are just adopting over here within the Catholic community. It's very, very niche, which is for homeschoolers, but gives them 2 days a week where their children can go to, um, let's say, to get some formal education from professional teachers. For us, the 2 day a week thing goes under the radar of the school inspection system. So it means that we can do not what we want, clearly, but we can evade the state intervention by doing it that way. And the homeschoolers then can just get on with the curriculum as given by the teachers in the other 3 days at home. So there are ways that we're looking at over here of trying to get around the system. A friend of mine wanted to set up a Catholic school for boys, couldn't do it in the United Kingdom because of legislation and regulations and health and safety and God knows what else. So he went to France, bought a chateau in
Oh,
France, and has set up the Chavannes International School for Boys, and it's doing very well.
I love France.
Yeah.
But no, we've got a media guy here in the United States, Mike Rowe. I know you might I don't know if you're familiar with him. He had a show called Dirty Jobs, but he. I don't want to speak for him, but he's very sympathetic to boys who are more drawn towards like vocational schools
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
or something like that.
Mm.
And I'm sorry to hear that you're leaving education because, especially, I don't know what it's like in the UK, but especially in the United States, teaching has become a very female profession. I mean, especially in Catholic schools, from grade K, kindergarten through 8, I never had a male teacher. It's a sad story that I write about in my book. In 8th grade, actually, you kind of remind me of him. I had a male teacher very much like you. And I was so thrilled, and my life started to really change around because finally, for the first time in my life, I had a healthy, moral man that took an interest in me, other than my father. And he ended up about 2 or 3 weeks into our school year having health problems and he had to retire. But even in like secondary education in the United States, where you typically find more men teachers, which is high school, that's even becoming less so because it's a second. A lot of times, a teaching profession is like a second income for a family, where the woman is a teacher because it's not high paying, and it does offer her a lot of time off if she's got kids. But it's sad for um, boys.
It is very, and I can see that. And when I was when I was fully committed at the time to being a teacher, we set up a mentoring program to bring businesses on board, businessmen, quite often black businessmen who would come in and mentor our black lads, particularly those with behavior issues, or any of the boys with behavior issues, to be honest, and to give them some sense of focus. I think with my own decision, I mean, I'm still going to be working within the Catholic community, and the place I'm going to work at still enables me to do my apostolate for men and for Catholic men. So I hope that I'm actually moving, because I was in state education, so I hope I'm moving away from the state sector and focusing my energies on the Catholic sector and Catholic men who perhaps need to be the advanced party in the end. I think we need to support our own first, and they themselves can then go out uh, in multiples and do more work than I could do as an individual man. So I think the Catholic community needs my energies at the moment more than perhaps the state community. But I do have a sense of sorrow leaving some of those boys behind who I've built up some good relationships with. My job is going to be taken over by a woman. I know that. We've already employed her.
Wow.
I have a class of 24, 4 of which are girls and 20 are boys. And I worked damn hard last year to lick those boys into shape and to build up a good relationship with them. So I'm going to feel sorry. I am feeling sorry about leaving them. But it's the right time. And there are other things ahead, working with Catholic men and young men.
It's not that female teachers aren't capable, because I certainly, had my share of female teachers that were good. But I'm just thinking about that one male teacher I had for a short time in the 8th grade, is that men just have a different way of approaching things. And I remember that, I remember just comparing the two, and I do this in my book. This female teacher, she tended to holler, she tended to screech a bit, become a bit of a harpy, Whereas this male teacher, and you see it in men who are, I don't know what the word is, I don't want to say masculine, but very sure of themselves. They can just look at you and you're just stopped dead in your tracks. And he had that power. Like, he could just look at you and you're like, oh, am I in trouble?
Yeah, that's right. You knew it, didn't you?
And I knew a priest that had that ability too when I was a kid, and I was an altar boy, because I was actually a pretty scared, timid kid. But I remember at one mass, I don't know what I was doing. I was probably a bit, daydreaming or something. But during mass, he just looked at me, and I was like, "Oh man, he knows that I'm not here. And he had that power."
Yeah, yeah, and it's going back to the elusiveness of masculinity. what is that power? You know, that's where I struggled as a boy and as a young man to understand that power. And what is it that causes some men to lead almost effortlessly, that other men will just go, we love that guy, we'll do anything for him. I remember one of my phys ed teachers who taught us rugby, loved him. And he was a short man, he was a tough little man, he was a Scot, I think. Didn't take any crap from us. But if he said, right, guys, rugby team together, we're playing that school next Saturday, we were like, yep, we're behind you all the way, off we go. And I wasn't the best at rugby. Rugby, to some extent, scared me. But if he was taking us, Mr. Sedman, I fell into line and I played rugby to the best of my ability. But that elusiveness, and it goes back, I think, to this idea that women are and men become. What is it that we're becoming? We're becoming, as I said earlier, the representative, God's representative on earth. That's the greatest mystery that we as men are ever going to be accessing. That the closer that we come to God the Father through our interior lives, the more we reflect him and the more we reflect the mystery of his paternity. Now, even on a secular level, those guys who had worked the greatest on their interior integrity, who were men of their word, men of honor, men of action, even if they weren't believers in the faith, Catholics, they had developed a stoic level of integrity that meant that there was something about them that was more than the rest of us mere humans. And it might be elusive, but actually, when it boils down to it, it comes through or comes from hard work on one's own character and developing one's own character. And I didn't realize this as a kid. Yeah. It was softness for me. It was thumb-sucking, masturbation, pornography. Life was easy. I was looking for pleasure. I was looking for excess. I was looking for drink. I wasn't above just going out and drinking and socializing. And there's nothing elusive about that. But we always admire the man that works hard on himself and raises himself above the ordinary. And it comes from hard work, doesn't it? And self-discipline.
Yeah. There's so much you said there. One thing, I just want to add a couple of things because I love listening to you. But one of the things you mentioned is like stature, because this priest that I knew for a short time as a boy, he was an Irish priest, a short man, like a little leprechaun, probably 90 pounds. But yeah, he had that aura of respect around him. And I think sometimes it came from childhood. I think it came from suffering, because I mean, certainly him coming from Ireland at that time, it just couldn't have been easy. And you kind of see that in photographs of Pope Benedict when he was a child, growing up in World War II, era Germany. I think when I went to Europe, they kind of were like, you're not quite like a lot of Americans, especially in France. When I was in France at Fauconville Abbey, although I didn't speak to the monks that much, when I go out, they said you have a more sort of European French, I think, and not to say anything about my past, but I think that did come from quite a bit of suffering in my childhood. And
I certainly recognize that in you. I've seen your videos before we've spoken, and read a lot of your stuff and identified the suffering that you've gone through.
You as well too.
Yeah. And I think, and when I've watched your videos and looked at the seriousness at which you tackle those topics from your past life, but also the seriousness with which you take your apostolate to the gay community in San Francisco, and you go to the Pride marches. And I love the fact that you wear a t-shirt that says Jesus love gays and you take rosaries out there, and your pictures that you post where you are there smiling with the men who are there, the men flamboyantly dressed up, and you're very soberly dressed, but you're there with them and smiling. You know that you have at heart a real love and warmth for them. But I think your eyes certainly show a seriousness that comes from a level of suffering, and you certainly have suffered from what you've written. And it really is key to forming the man. I think, obviously, I'm not a philosopher here at all, but there's that level of suffering that we've brought upon ourselves by making the wrong choices and suffering the impact of those wrong choices. And there's also that level of suffering that can be imposed upon us that we take on freely, and both mold us. And I've learned a lot from the suffering that's the result of my own poor actions. And I wish that I could protect my sons from that to some extent. I think if I were to give any advice to any man about being manly, is really that point that you've brought up, that suffering has to be embraced for what suffering can bring us. And we don't know what suffering can bring us until we've been through it. So we have to face it on and deal with it.
Yeah.
But because we're in a very difficult position as men in this day and age, because there are no men who are telling us that. There are few men who have gone before us who have suffered, who can turn around and say to us, come on, boys, it might be hard, but we've been through it. We're still alive. Just get on with it, and we'll see you over the other side. And that's what we're lacking.
Yeah. I don't want to belabor this, but I've always found it interesting that, I mean, the generation we call here in the United States that the greatest generation, or the generation that went through the Depression, World War II, I mean, suffered immeasurably. I mean, you see that stoicism in, Queen Elizabeth II, who lived through all that as a child.
Yeah.
Um,
and then you look at her children and her
I
grandchildren.
know, I was going to say her children are a good example. But I think, I mean, in the United States, we had that with the baby boomers, which was the 60s generation that just wanted to tear everything apart. The family, gender, sexuality, morality, everything, marriage. It's interesting that generation cocooned and protected the baby boomers. They didn't want their children to experience what they had experienced. And you kind of see that now with my generation, the Gen Xers, who raised the millennials, or the snowflake generation, where it's even more cut off from reality. I think a lot of that has to do with the internet, where you can literally just create you create your own communities where everybody's self-affirming and agrees with you.
And I was going to say technology. I mean, you got there with the internet, but technology divorces men, certainly, from physicality. That we've got robots and machines to do what we normally would have done, and therefore we're not in touch with even our basic muscle structures. It wasn't until I was 40 that I went back to the gym. I went to the gym in my 20s and then left it and started powerlifting, and realized that I had lost the connection with my muscularity. And it makes sense now to step away from technology, and to use my physicality, because you recognize who you are in that you can lift, you can carry, you can rough and tumble, you can dig your garden. Another bit of advice I give to young men is to let go of the technology, let go of the phone, let go of the internet, and reconnect with something physical. Go out and chop a log of wood.
I think physicality and being healthy, and you don't have to be a bruiser or anything. And I've written about this as well, because surrounding, and San Francisco is like the most liberal city in the United States, and surrounding San Francisco is a lot of open land, at beaches and parks and mountains and things. And I love to go out and be in nature. And one thing I've always been kind of a keen observer of, like, human behavior. And when I see these couples, typically white, couples, young couples, yuppie couples, from San Francisco. I can tell they have the designer track suits on and very expensive sneakers, and everything's cool.
Mm,
Fine, expensive bikes. But it's
mm.
interesting when a male and a female become more physically active, how the sexes are even further differentiated. With just seeing the difference between a male physical structure and female, where the guy is, if they have a kid, the guy's carrying the kid, and if they're going to a park or a beach, and he's carrying the ice chest, and he's pushing a stroller, and the wife, God bless her, is carrying a water bottle. So I always find that very interesting.
Yeah, yeah. But isn't that symptomatic of what's happening in this day and age? I think what we haven't tapped into is the fact that this is uh, Satan's way of ruining the family of God. That this move to androgyny, this move to make men lose any sense of who they are physically, mentally, spiritually, whatever context we're looking at, is a spiritual battle against evil. Satan wants to destroy the family. How do you destroy the family? Well, you hit the men, you weaken the men, you make them helpless, you shackle them, essentially. And if there's then no one left to protect the family, the devil waltzes right in and destroys it from inside. And it's because we have, as men, have lost a clear view on who we are physically, what our male attributes are that are clearly different to female, and as you say, very different to female attributes. And we've lost that. Not only that, we stopped protecting it. We've stopped telling ourselves and other men that this is who we are. These are the male parameters. And by default, these are the female parameters, because you can only clearly differentiate yourself as a male by what you see is different to you in the feminine, in the female. And those that want to make us look exactly the same, or say that a male can become a female, or vice versa, it's demonic, isn't it? It's a deliberate, evil attempt to muddy the waters and to confuse us as men, so that we step back from our responsibilities because we don't know what they are anymore, because they're so blurred and confused.
Yeah. And it's not that women aren't physically capable, because I'm sure there's women that could just, beat me up. But
yeah, at my gym, women lift heavier than I do. Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, but I think fundamentally, at the high performance scale, men are always going to physically outdo women, and that's why it's so controversial here in the States, where they want to allow. I'm getting into really tangent, but where they want to allow transgender women to compete against cisgendered women, and like somebody like Martina Navratilova is like, hold on. So it's like what you said. It's a denial of basic truths. So,
Yeah.
something you wrote here too, and I want to start getting into the church, because we haven't really. Well, we've talked about the faith, but I really want to get a little deeper into it. And I've already kept you so long.
Not at all. I have no call on my time at the moment. As I said, I've left teaching. I'm on holiday.
Okay.
Vacation, as you'd say. So I'm more than happy to take the time.
You wrote here an increase. You didn't write here. This is from your speech to the Catholic Medical Association. You said an increasingly fatherless world is an increasingly secular world. Why? I mean, I know why, but
yeah. Well, I think it goes back to the point that I've made earlier about men representing God the Father, and I think this is something that I can't lay claim to this as being an original thought from me, because I've actually taken it from. You come across Devin Shard, an American guy who set up Fathers of St. Joseph.
you mentioned that, yeah.
Yes, yeah. And this was kind of a revelation to me, that the denial of fatherhood in its human form is a denial of God the Father. I subsequently read a book. I don't know if this was Devin Shard's recommendation or I found it subsequently, but a book by Paul Vitz called Faith of the Fatherless. And it looks at atheism as a result of those who have been poorly fathered. Because in that poor fathering, we don't recognize God the Father. And I think it's quite clear that if our own father has been horrible to us, has even abused us and done horrific things to us, our view on God the Father and on faith and on the church is going to be a similar view to that of our own father. And conversely, those statistics that get wheeled out often among Catholic communities about those children whose fathers are, I was going to say, religiously practicing. I meant, faithful churchgoers. Children of those fathers, largely speaking, will also be faithful churchgoers too. So it works both ways. If your father is absent, you have a dim view of God. If your father is present and is faithful and takes you to church, that somehow leaves a greater impression on you as a young child than even if it was your mother who took you to church. I don't want to perhaps anticipate where you might be going with this, but the same takes place when you're dealing with a parish priest.
Yeah, that's kind of where I want to go. Yeah.
Yeah, go on. We'll ask.
This is something else you said, and this is I'm gonna tie this into something else, and hopefully it'll all come around. You said, why do we? Excuse me. Why do we? Excuse me. Let me start over. Why do we so desire a father's approval? Because we want to be approved by God the Father. This is really important, I think, in terms of homosexuality, and why I think a lot of gay men have a problem specifically with the Catholic Church. Let's say not with the Anglican Church, because the Anglican Church, you have this propensity towards female clerics and all these things. And gay men, we're not desiring of our mother's love. We already have it. There's no pushback from the Anglican Church. The Catholic Church, we still have an all-male priesthood, and you call him father. I don't know what they do with the Anglican, with the female cleric. I don't. They call him reverend, or
probably. Yeah, good question. I don't know. I'll have to find out.
Okay, so
I'll walk up to a female vicar and I'll say, "Hello, Father," and see what the response is.
Oh boy. So this is why there's a lot of you talk about it here, not in terms of homosexuality, but that's where I saw it. That's why there's a lot of antagonism between, I think, the LGBT community, especially gay men, and the Catholic Church. It's because gay men essentially are still want their father's love, and no Christian church, I think, although it's really, well, I won't get into that. It's really has a lot of problems, but no Christian church represents that patriarchy or that male-centered, Christianity than Catholicism, and that's why it's especially, egregious to them. That's my argument. That's my argument.
It is an interesting question, isn't it? And it's something that I've thought a lot about, particularly since reading your writings about where the church is at the moment. And I generally take the view that I'm not going to comment on the church hierarchy, on decisions that are being made by the church. Certainly not on my Facebook page on Catholic Man UK, because it is so divisive and it really, really brings up some contentious and quite aggressive interactions between the men in the group. And I said very clearly, we're not talking about that on Catholic Man UK. We're talking about being men and how to be Catholic men. But it is very clear here, and I guess in the States as well, I don't guess, I can see because I read some of the literature that comes from the States, that the church is in trouble, and the church has pursued a route that is, one could argue, feminine, that men have been disenfranchised from the church. Men don't know their place or position in the church, and they bang up against this wall, this accusation that this is because the church has been patriarchal and it's because it's been run by men, and these men have damaged it beyond recognition. And there has to be that acceptance that, yes, the men in charge have made some very poor decisions, and that has
Sam,
impacted us.
yeah, Sam, don't you believe that as fatherhood has gone by the wayside, so has the priesthood? Because,
Good,
and
exactly.
I kind of make this argument in my book where we've had dysfunctional, deadbeat, absent, neglectful, abusive fathers. Therefore, we've had the same thing in the priesthood.
Yes, absolutely, and that's where I was going to sort of bring the argument. Every priest that enters the church is a priest who's had a father
Yep.
or not, or who's had a good father or not. And
Yep.
so the state of fatherhood has an immediate impact on, well, on any social condition, environment. I think it was John Paul II, wasn't it, who said that the society goes by way of the family.
Yep.
Well, you'd want to add that the family goes by way of the father. Therefore, society and the church goes by way of the father. And every social ill, largely speaking, you could trace back to poor fathering.
Yep.
Crime, civil disobedience, well, the breakdown of families, clearly, um, violence against the police and other authorities, the abortion debate. I mean, I read something today that some Catholic woman who had their own blog or website said something along the lines of, and it was very well meaning, that, oh, men should have an argument or should be able to take part in the abortion debate. I'm thinking, men are fundamental to the abortion debate. Every act of pregnancy comes from a decision of a man to put his genitalia into your genitalia. And every decision not to keep that child is a result of his primary action. Every social ill, largely, I could guess, I'm not a social scientist, can be traced back to poor fathering and lack of good intervention by men in the family and in their local society, in their local community.
Yeah.
I'm sure. I'm
A
sure
lot
someone could take me to task on that, because who am I? I'm a teacher. What do I know?
out there. One thing about the priesthood too is I think we've had priests a lot of times now who are not so much sons of their father, but are very much mama's boys. And I don't want to be a misogynist because I think, like I said before, I think women have had to step up where men have took a step back. And I just think I see it reflective. I don't know what it's like in England, but I've seen it reflective just in parishes where priests who are a bit of a mama's boy, have a lot of females around them that who take power, and they're happy to abdicate that to let women run councils, run parish administration, pastoral councils, serve as Eucharist ministers, acolytes, you name it.
Yeah.
And I think they're comfortable with that.
Yes.
And to a lot of men in the pews are kind of like, where do I fit into this? Because the man kind of seems like just an administrator that steps in at the last minute, performs the consecration and then out. It's kind of like just, the church is run by the supermom and dad is an afterthought. The priest is an afterthought. He's not
I've
picking the
seen that.
yeah, he's not picking the music. He's not involved. And I know priests, and this is a complicated issue. I know how now a lot of priests have a lot of other duties with fundraising and a lot of other things. It's too much.
Mm.
And
But and I agree with you, and I've seen examples in my own parishes that I've been part of as I've grown up, and been taking my own families there.
sorry, that's
No, 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 no. I was just really gathering my thoughts together, because you don't want to point the finger, but at the same time, you need to. And this is the difficulty that I have with Catholic Man UK.
well,
Is
let me just say this, Sam. I'm trying to figure out why a lot of times Catholicism is not attractive to men, and let's be honest, it isn't. I mean, and that's why a lot of men are gravitated, and I did, towards the TLM, the traditional Latin Mass,
Yes,
because
likewise.
it's very masculine centered. You don't have a lot of women running around the sanctuary. Um, and it's more appealing, I think, to men. And men, I think, who are drawn to that liturgy oftentimes bring their family along with them. Whereas with, let's say, a more female centered liturgy, it's a lot of times the women are dragging, literally, dragging the man along.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's the answer is probably going to come or have to come from laymen who recognize what the situation is, who recognize their own failings insofar as they have let that happen, or they have gone along with it and thought, well, yeah, this is fine, I'll just turn up, and who haven't argued for a substantial masculine approach, nor themselves who have taken up a substantial masculine role or supported that, let's say, with the Latin Mass. It's very interesting. I've been going to the Latin Mass now for 2 years, and I went there by accident. Some male friends and kept inviting me, and I went along once just to placate them and go, right, guys, I've gone. That's it. I'm off. And I fell in love with it there and then that Sunday, and I never looked back. And what is interesting, as you say, many families go, and the men who bring their families are men who are very active in the life of Catholicism, of UK Catholicism, one way or the other. One of them's involved in pro-life issues. Another one is involved in the Regina Caeli School I mentioned earlier. Another one works for a Catholic Formation Centre in London. Each man that I speak to is doing something for the church of great merit and great worth. It's a very different feeling. And yet, it might be the same with you. Those of us that do belong to the Latin Mass group, society, whatever you call it, are still seen as perhaps a bunch of dated weirdos. No. But, you know, the battle is it's only just begun.
Yeah. I want to drop another quote of yours on you. The only way to really understand authentic masculinity is to observe and learn from authentic men. And I mean, this is a problem, I think, in the church. Now, I don't know if in England you have female altar servers. I mean, in the United States, it really, went off on a tangent where I mean, it used to be altar boys when I was a kid, although it was going the other way. And now it's become predominantly female. So I mean, that's another avenue where young boys were not able to observe authentic masculinity if it existed at all in their parish in the form of the parish priest. And then, I mean, another thing is that no priest, I mean, at least in the United States, would want to mentor a young man. I mean, no priest in his right mind would want to do that, just because there's just so much liability in terms, even if they don't do anything wrong, there's just so much there that would keep a priest very, very fearful and cautious.
Yeah. We are fighting an uphill
it's a mess,
battle, aren't we? It is a mess. It is a mess. But then you see, but it's also ripe for something to happen. I think I'm very hopeful. I have hope, and I'm a big fan of Lord of the Rings, and Tolkien's theory of eucatastrophe. So a catastrophe is when something happens out of the blue and completely destroys the protagonists and the story ends badly. Eucatastrophe is the positive reverse of that everything is going so badly, and yet out of that mess, victory happens, unlooked for victory. Frodo and Sam throw the ring, or Gollum jumps into the fire and the ring is destroyed unexpectedly, and suddenly the battle is won. And I write about this on the blog. I don't know if you've seen that article, but
Yeah.
one of the things that supports a eucatastrophe happening is every protagonist fulfilling their duty, even though it seems hopeless. Everyone sticks to their posts and does what they should be doing, and it's because of that that something else down the line that you just didn't imagine is able to happen. So Aragorn in this, he distracts the eye of Sauron by standing outside the gates to Mordor, and it's because of that distraction, because of Aragorn standing firm and not running away from the face of death, and he is likely to be killed and destroyed. He stands firm, sticks to his duty, and Sam and Frodo walk through unobserved. And because they push through and throw the ring into the fire, Aragorn and his armies are saved outside the gates of Mordor. And I think what is going to save us is these pockets of men who recognize what their duty is, who have trained hard in the virtues, who've trained hard in the disciplines of being faithful Catholic men. And there are pockets of them. I'm talking to a lot of guys in Ireland across the water from us, who are seeing what we're doing, and they're saying, well, we're doing something similar. Guys in Scotland, guys in Wales, and I'm talking to you in the States. And I've been influenced by the Catholic men's movements in the United States. These pockets of men are rising up. And this is where I have hope, great hope, that the tide will turn as everyone else sees the mess and goes, where can we go for something solid, something firm? Who are those men over there? They look solid and firm. The Catholics? Wow. And then they will discover what it is that's going to save them.
You foresaw what I was going to talk about, but I want to, if you allow me, I wanted to talk about the Catholic hierarchy just one more time, in just a very general term. Now this is from your website. This is powerful. It's a kind of a long quote, so everybody bear with me. It's mainly a quote from Saint Augustine. You wrote, Saint Augustine emphasizes the father's spiritual headship of his family in his Sermon 94 on selected lessons of the New Testament. He goes so far as to compare the father's role in the home to that of bishops in the church. And this is the quote that you reproduced here from Saint Augustine. Discharge our office in our own houses. A bishop is called from hence because he superintends, because he takes care and attends to others, to every man hence. If he is the head of his own house, ought the office of the episcopate to belong to take care how his household believe, that none of them fall into heresy, neither wife nor son nor daughter. Do not neglect then the least of those belonging to you. Look after the salvation of all your household with all vigilance. That was a terrible reading, but people can look it up if they'd like. And this goes back to what I said, where fatherhood wanes. I think the priesthood has waned. And if the priesthood wanes, from where is the episcopate chosen? From the priesthood. So if we have weak fathers and weak priests, we're going to have weak bishops. And I mean, I've seen it here in the United States where bishops are just not interested in making those difficult decisions, where you've had to make as a father, where my kids are, well, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I mean, I know as a son who had a father, where sometimes a dad has to make a decision that isn't going to be popular, that's going to cause a lot of unhappiness, disruption, in the family. And I see bishops not wanting to not wanting to do it, but just absolutely avoiding it. They just won't, even when it's when their action is clearly needed, they just won't do it. It's it's being a bad bishop, it's being a bad father, being a bad man. It's just bad all the way around.
Yeah, and I see this in your writings, and I follow you on Facebook, so I see that you write regularly about these, and it comes through. I think certainly the bishops in America seem to have a higher
Yeah,
public profile than the bishops in England and Wales
here's
and
that way.
Scotland.
Yeah,
Yeah, and ours perhaps are keeping their heads under the, or keeping under the radar, keeping their heads below the parapet
well, they do that here
over
as
here.
well too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Um,
mean, I could name like Bishop Paparocki, who, I mean, nothing against them. They're in rather minor dioceses, smaller dioceses. I mean, they're not minor and small to them. But Bishop Paparocki and Bishop Strickland in Texas, like on the homosexual issue, have been very outspoken. The other bishops, no, they run around it as fast as they can. What if they had this issue in their own? What if a father had this issue? Well, they do this. I'm answering my own question. I mean, I see it again in families where there's an issue of homosexuality in the family, and the mother is concerned a lot of times, or the mother is very supportive, and the dad is just like, I'm checking out.
mm,
Let's avoid
yeah,
this.
yeah, yeah. I think there's going to be some very difficult times ahead for the hierarchy. They've got some difficult decisions to make. They will have some difficult decisions to make. Um, but it's going to be incumbent on us laymen to be supportive. Don't know how that's going to look for those bishops. It might have to be tough love. Who knows? But I think from what I've read of your writing, what I read in the American Catholic press about the bishops, I can see that there is a lot of upset, definitely. And it's perhaps more vocal than I might be aware of over here with our bishops, although we have our own problems too.
Yeah. I mean, my dad, and I don't want to belabor this issue, but my dad at one point didn't say much. Oh, he didn't say really anything at all about the way I was leading my life. Although, again, I could tell by the way he looked at me, just because, it was a look. And as mothers do, I think a lot of times moms try to keep the peace, love everybody, sees a child that's struggling. I'm just going to love them even more. And that's going to just turn everything around. Sometimes it does. Most of the time, I don't think it does. But my dad at one point did say, knock it off. I just
Yeah.
wish the bishops would do that. Knock it off. This stuff, knock it off.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think they've got very caught up, haven't they, with social issues, with politics, and really what needs to happen is the focus on their family, which is the parish or the parishioners within their diocese. They need to be rolling up their sleeves and walking among us, and listening to our problems, talking face to face with us, and giving us some signs of at least empathy that they understand how things are for us. But I think they're very caught up, aren't they, with whatever's going on at these higher levels that we don't appear to understand.
I don't want to put you in a spot here, but do you, and this is a very general question, do you think priests and the hierarchy in general maybe are becoming a bit more feminine in their approach to the parish as like I think they do. I see it in the LGBT, where I'm going to be welcoming and loving and just love people to death and put my arms around them and just squeeze them, and then everything will be okay. That's all we have to do. I think a masculine and I think a fatherly and paternal approach is different. I think it certainly is loving and compassionate, but I think there's a different part of it too, which is strong. And you talked about this at the very beginning. It's strong, and it's also has a strong adherence to the truth, as difficult as that is to hear, and that's what people need.
Yeah, and when you read what or little that we read about Jesus's relationship with his apostles, these 12 men that he collects around them in the Bible, he's very short on praise, isn't he? He will tell them off, and he will give them commands, and he'll send them out. But he's not very good at going, oh, "You're such a good lad. Oh, come here for a hug." We don't read that. Um, I've been very fortunate with the priests who I associate with in relation to Catholic Man UK are all very strong, manly, masculine priests who have a clear vision, not only of masculinity, but of the church and the way the church should be going and what the church should be doing. A lot of priests are members of Catholic Man UK, which is fantastic because they come into discussion, they put us straight, they tell us the truth, they don't hold back if we are off course in some of the topics that we post, or the men's responses to them. The priest will come in and go, "Nope, actually, it's like this. This is what the church teaches," and make it very clear and very straightforward to us. So I've been very, very fortunate in that respect. I've got absolutely nothing to complain about with regard to the priests who I know in my sort of immediate circles. Though I have experienced in the past, otherwise, let's say, other priests who take other lines. But it has been interesting for me to read what you've written and to see from your point of view how, in some instances, how disastrous that's been for you personally. When you talked in the early days about going to talk to priests.
Others too, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And that was an eye-opener for me.
Yeah, continues.
Obviously never been in that position to have to go and talk to a priest about that sort of situation. But to get some of the responses that you got were not helpful at all. Yeah. I can see exactly why you have the issues with them that you have.
Yeah. Thank you. I'll make one more statement, then I'll drop.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious what you think. I mean, I think men in general need a strong leader. I think they need, just because I'm talking to you from the UK, I think they need somebody like a St. Edmund Campion. They need somebody like that. But I think, especially in the LGBT sphere, they don't. They get somebody like James Martin. That's what they get. I could see those two as like polar opposites. One's very manly and strong and virile and, will lay down his life for the truth. And the other is very Jesuit. And, so it's unfortunate. So.
Again, whether this is just a difference between the States and England, we don't seem to have this level of personality. Or
celebrity priest.
Yes, yeah, exactly. We don't have a Bishop Barron. We don't have a James Martin.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah. The flip side is that we don't have anyone. But then we're a small nation, a small number of Catholics. The men that we do have, the leaders that we do have, are very localized leaders and very good at being localized leaders. And perhaps that's what they should be doing rather than standing up for the nation and saying, "This is, I represent you." I think we do agree here that we seem to lack some kind of outstanding leadership. But it is a different beast over here, Catholicism. If you remember that Catholics have been a persecuted minority since the Reformation. And I think our Catholicism tends to be fairly quiet and fairly reserved. And the leaders within that also tend to be quite quiet and reserved. And I can't speak really much beyond Bedford either.
No. But I gathered that from reading like Evelyn Woe's stuff, because I read a lot of his stuff, and he was a Catholic convert. Yeah, he talked about that as well. If you don't mind, I know I've kept you a while. I'm watching my clock here. I want to turn to something just really, this is a more personal, and I think it's probably very important, because you talk about, this is in an article you wrote called Becoming More Manly. And you talk about forgiveness in terms of our relationships with our dads, and that played a big part in mine with my father. And I think this is really important for a lot of the guys out there who had really dysfunctional relationships with their dads. You write, forgiveness must be at the heart of our relationship with our fathers. It's really important. And you talked about getting to know your dad. And that was a big part of my journey with my dad is being, as a child, you're completely unaware of, I think, of your dad almost as a human being. I mean, he's just this figure there that, like, a lot of times dispenses judgment, or, is critical, or isn't there, or whatever. But I think when I got to know, not from my father, but from his family, what his childhood was like in Italy during World War II, and it was completely horrendous. And it made a lot of sense to me. And I think our relationship that we had, um, looking at it through the lens of his childhood, I think a lot of things started, a lot of the original hurt. And you talk about the father wound in on your website, and I was like, wow, a straight guy is talking about the father wound. Is that, I mean, because you hear the father wound in a lot of ex-gay and, same-sex attracted circles,
Oh, okay.
but
Yeah.
I don't see it that much around straight men. And that's really important, I think, getting to know your dad if he's alive, but even if he's passed on, getting to know what his childhood was like, because I think it certainly informed me about how he really did the best he could with what he got from his dad, which was next to nothing.
Mm.
So
Very similar pattern with my own father and his father. Yeah.
you talked about that.
Very weak lineage of masculinity there.
And
I think heritage is important, isn't it? We need to know where we've come from and who it is that we've come from. Because if we extrapolate that back, we've come from the Father, God the Father. And it's interesting, isn't it, that the who is it? Is it Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, that starts with the lineage of Jesus and makes it clear who Jesus's fathers were all the way back. Lineage and heritage is so important to our understanding as men.
Yeah. I want to read this real quick because again, it's kind of a long quote, but I think it's really super important. And I just want you to talk about it because I think this can help a lot of guys. You wrote, this process is what psychoanalysts refer to as mourning the ideal father and forgiving the real father, letting go of both the person we wanted our father to be and of our resentment of his shortcomings. If we accomplish this, we free ourselves from the damaging emotional impact of poor fathering, those chains that keep us tied to a quivering boyhood, constantly searching for paternal affirmation, and we are able to enter the realms of mature manhood. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm not sure I've got much more to say on that.
Oh, well, there's a lot there, especially in terms of people with same-sex attraction, where you talk about searching for paternal affirmation. I know the LGBT community hates me, especially gay men, is that I think that's at the heart of the homosexual issue. I know it gets conflated into something just massive. I think it's a simple problem. You said it, searching for paternal affirmation. Thank you.
Yeah.
Not that it's easily solved, but I think it's easily diagnosed.
Yes, I think it is. Yeah. The big question is, how do all these wounded men, gay men and straight men,
Yep.
how do they recover when there is such a dearth of strong father figures who can help them? I mean, it is as you said earlier, it is a mess out there. The what's it say in the gospel? The harvest is great and the laborers are few. It's a very, very tricky path or furrow to plough in the future. I mean, this is why I set up Catholic Man UK, to bring men into the fold, to at least give them some sense that there is an organization out there, there is something tangible out there that is wanting to help men to be men and Catholic men to be men. But how do you practically on the ground take each and every man and point him in the right direction? It's a
I think
tremendous task.
I think you answered the question for me that I just asked you. It's from one of your articles, and
I'm glad you found something because I can't remember.
okay. You talk about situations that a boy, his individual father, may have been lacking, and you wrote, if he could turn to his father for something that interested or bothered him, he could turn to uncles, grandfathers. Excuse me. If I'm going to start over, if he if he couldn't turn to his father for something that interested or bothered him, he could turn to uncles, grandfathers, neighbors, elders. In medieval times, boys were sent to other households to be pages or squires. Master craftsmen took on apprentices who lived in their households and were taught all the skills of the trade until they became masters in their own right. I talk about this in my book too, because I'm really interested in that from a historical standpoint, but also psychological. And I think that's the answer. I think where fathers have lacked in the raising of their biological sons, other men have to take up. What is the answer? That's the only answer. Because if good moral men don't, and this is what I've said with the problem of abuse and homosexuality, there are men who are not moral, who are not healthy, and don't have that child's welfare in mind, will step in.
Yeah.
This is this is this is the this is all our social ills, from gangs to sexual predators, because those men, they're predominantly men, search out those boys, and I was one of them, who are lacking, who are needy, who need masculine affirmation, like you just taught. I'm not victim blaming, but I'm just saying that predators pick out an easy target. And a boy with a strong father, who was raised with a strong father, is not is not as easy a target as a boy who was raised like me, very alienated from
Have you seen
masculinity and
the?
quite starving for masculine attention.
Yeah. Now, have you seen the article on LifeSite News, which references you actually, by Matthew Hoffman? I'm just reading on my phone here, and it's talking about it's the daughter of Marion Zimmer Bradley, who is writing about her experience of growing up with her.
I did not see it. No, she's a great person. No, I did not see it though.
Yeah, so she talks about growing up with her homosexual father and lesbian mother, who were obviously
Her
very well
story,
known.
yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just going to have to scroll down the article pretty quickly because I've posted it on Catholic Man UK, but with one of the quotes from her saying more or less exactly what you're saying. And I'm going to have to.
She's a brave lady.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a fantastic article as well. I'm not going to find it quickly enough now, am I? But she says pretty much what you say about young men not growing up with fathers who will protect them from predators, and they are the ones who the predators actually then deliberately aim for.
And that also applies to young women who are raised with weak, absent fathers. They are also more susceptible, I think, to predation.
Yeah, I remember when my daughter, when she was 13, and my children in the Army Cadets, and she went to an Army Cadet camp, age 13, and a few days after that, she stepped outside the front door to talk on her phone. I was like, "You never step outside the front door to talk on your phone. What's going on? Give me your phone." And it turns out that a 16-year-old male cadet had taken a fancy to her and swapped numbers, and she was phoning him. And so I said, "Right, give me the phone." And I had a chat with him on the phone. I said, "What are you doing? This is my daughter. She's 13. You're 16. First question I asked him was, "Where's your dad?" And he said, "Oh, my dad's not around. Dad's left. They're divorced. I'm just living with my mum." So I said to him, "Well, what do you want from my daughter? Do you just want to be friends or whatever?" And he said, no, I want her to be my girlfriend." And I said, "Well, that's not going to happen. Not like immediately now." And his was, he got shirty with me. He's like, "Well, what about my happiness?" I was like, "Damn your happiness! You know, have you got a job? Can you provide for her? You know, are you qualified yet?" And I said, "Right, well, look, you can build up a friendship with her, but you are going out with her where I say you're going out and at what time, and I'm dropping her off and I'm picking her up." And when he got over his anger and huffiness, he fell in line with it very well. But I felt flushed. I felt the heart beating that I was saying this to this 16-year-old who was arguing with me on the phone. And you have to, as fathers for your daughters, step in and make that intervention and protect them. She went out with him for a couple of times and came back and said, "Oh, Dad, he's such an idiot. I don't want to go out with him." and
I
she's
love that.
and she's never she's never chosen to pursue a romantic relationship with any. She herself now is 16, and we've talked a lot about relationships and that her future husband is out there waiting for her, and we need to pray that he grows up as a good man, a good virtuous man.
Yeah.
It seems to have rubbed off on her. I don't think she's not afraid of building up relationships with lads, and she goes out with him in a group of mixed group of boys and girls. But again, it struck me then the level of deliberate intervention that you need with your children to make sure that they keep to the straight and narrow.
Yeah, that's discernment. Yeah, and that's being. I like to kind of end these talks kind of on a good note because usually all of my conversations are they're a bit dark sometimes. But and I think I mean I know what you would say, but or I think I have a guess, but and I think we just talked about it. But going forward, I mean, what can men do? I mean, I think they just have to step up in their own families. And I think if the family is in order, I think society will be in order. I just think the family right now is so distorted, primarily because of men, that the family's disordered, society's disordered. So what could you say to men right now? What do you need to do when you get up in the morning? Just be more involved.
Yes, first and foremost, it does come from a point of desperation, and this was what attracted me to reading your story. In the fact that you were so desperate that something had to change, and you've been through this. You know that level of desperation when you're totally on the floor and there's nothing that can be done, suffering, is what makes you think something has to change. I don't believe that men will change until they hit that rock bottom and go, "This is so bad, I need to do something." And that desperation drives them. It's very easy, I think, to say to men, be more involved in your family and say prayers with them and take them to mass. Unless these men see from themselves how desperate the situation is, spiritually, first and foremost, as much as physically, that we are fighting a spiritual battle, and that battle is profoundly, profoundly affecting our families and our society. We can easily wash that off as, "Oh, well, but that's just the way society is, and it's had that impact, and that technology, climate change, COVID, whatever." No, it's spiritual. These are the forces of evil. That recognition leads a man to deal with himself interiorly, to find that interior life, to fight that interior battle. There's the heroic battle, facing up with exactly what we are like as men, and how badly we've let ourselves down, our families down, God down. So there's no easy answer. I can't just glibly say, "Gentlemen, this is what you need to do and it will all change." It's a tough, bloody battle out there. But that is what we love, surely. Don't we love heroism? Don't we love courage? Don't we love getting into the thick of it? Get off your damn sofas, leave your computer games behind. This was what Gandalf did to King Theoden. He said to him, he drew him out of his stupor and gave him his sword and said, more or less, don't you feel better with your sword in your hand? He's basically saying to Theoden, gird your loins, grab your manhood and get out there and fight. So that's what I'd say to men. Recognize what the battle is, and recognize that when you engage with it, you are going to love it, because that's what you're made to do. Action follows being. You'll be doing what you've been created to be, and you'll love it. That's where you'll find great joy and happiness.
Yeah. And move on from past mistakes. Don't be dragged down by them, even though if things are a bit messy and chaotic in their family. Pick
Yeah,
it
I think the
up.
measure of the man is how much he can move on from those past mistakes and still aim for perfection, still aim to perfect himself. It's not so much falling down at that hurdle, it's getting up afterwards, is how we measure ourselves as men. We need other men to help us out with it. I've been
Exactly.
reading a great book by Donald Robertson called How to Think Like an Emperor, and it's on Marcus Aurelius and Stoicism. And there's, if anything, I'd recommend that every man gets a copy of that book. I think it's coming out in September, but you can get it on Audible.
Well, and not to belabor it, what went wrong there? Because he had Commodus was his son. It was an absolute disaster.
Oh, he did, didn't he? But that's, if you read this book, How to Think Like a Roman Emperor, the author makes a brilliant distinction between both men, and that Commodus sought pleasure as an escape from the issues, his issues, whereas Marcus Aurelius went the route of suffering, and is remembered for it.
Yes, yes.
Really a
Thank,
book worth reading.
thank you. Thank you so much, Sam. Thank you. God
Been an
bless you.
absolute delight. Thank you
And
for
I
having me.
and I encourage everyone to like this video and then also subscribe to my channel. Thank you. So I know it's late back there in England, but thank you for staying
Not at all.
awake here.
It's been a pleasure.
God bless you.
Thank you. Bye bye.